They say that hindsight is 20/20, and I absolutely agree with that. But I would also say that as a collector, hindsight is painful. And I say that it's painful because we have all made poor decisions. We passed over a book in the bin. We didn't buy a book. We bought a lower grade. We sold a book too soon. Whatever it is, we all have these decisions that we made in the past that we wish that we could do all over again. And so because of that, hindsight can be a little painful when we think about it. But the benefit potentially of revisiting these things is that it gives us an opportunity to maybe learn from some of those mistakes so that we make different mistakes in the future. It also gives me an opportunity to create a video in which I get to revisit some of my painful decisions that I've made. Anyway, with that said, I want to go back in time and think about if I could be a collector all over again, what type of things would I change? And I would encourage you to, down in the comment section, sound off. Let me know if what I talk about resonates with you, or if there are things that you would do differently if you could do it. Let's talk about it, because maybe in this shared pain, we'll maybe learn something or just commiserate together. Stay tuned. Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. As you heard in that intro, we are going to talk about some things that I would do differently if I could go back in time. And one of the things that I would absolutely change is that I would take the time to familiarize myself with comics from publishers other than Marvel. Now, admittedly, I love Marvel Comics. I also started collecting back as a preteen, teen. I didn't have a whole lot of money, and so I had to be very selective about where I was going to spend, my $1.25, because that's pretty much what comics costed at the time. They were like $1 or $1.25 when I originally started to collect, and I didn't have a whole lot of money, so I had to be very selective. With that said, I wish that I had taken the time to expose myself to more comics and more publishers from places other than Marvel, because I've learned over the years that DC has some amazing characters and some amazing comics that I wish that I had read back in the day when they were coming, in fresh, or that I had simply added to the collection, because I've had to play a lot of catch up over these last several years of familiarizing myself with a lot of these great story arcs and great characters that DC has to offer. Now, admittedly, I did read a lot of Image and Valiant, which is great, but my collection was primarily comprised of Marvel Comics. That is essentially all that I knew. And the good thing, I think, is, as I mentioned, I've played a lot of catch up. I also bought a collection of 100,000 comics, of which probably 70% is DC. And so I've made up a lot of ground where now my collection is probably more DC than anything else. So that's definitely one thing that I would change. The second thing that I would absolutely change if I could go back in time would be to spend more money buying the comics that I really wanted. As a preteen teen, I did not have a lot of money, as I mentioned, and I remember going to comic shops and going to cons and seeing books that cost $30, $40, $50, $100, and I could not bring myself to spend that kind of money. I also didn't necessarily have that kind of money, but I could have saved it up. I could have earned it and ended up doing it. I just did not fully appreciate the value that could come from comics over time. Like, I appreciated that comics had the potential to be worth money, and I took pretty good care of my comics, but I did not invest heavily into buying the comics that I really wanted. I simply bought the comics that were in front of me that I could afford. And that tended to be, for example, things like Web of Spider-Man, when I could have spent an extra $1, $2, $3 and bought Amazing Spider-Man. So that's one of the things that readily comes to my mind when I think about what would I have done different. Now, for me now, I think about this. I think about what are the books that are out now that I should buy that have a lot of potential in the future, either for me to be interested in, for my kids to be interested in, or to go up in value. And to my earlier point about DC Comics, I'm still to some degree or another catching up on buying all of those really great books that I think are quintessential to a DC collection. And so just trying to play catch up. I wish that I could go back and do it all over again back when comics were cheap. The third thing that I would absolutely change is that I would spend more money on supplies and materials to support my collection. Now, as I mentioned, I did not have a lot of money, right? That's like a reoccurring theme. And when I had money, I chose to spend that money on comics and not necessarily on supplies like bags and boards. Now, mind you, I collected as a teen. I also collected in my mid-20s and most recently. And a lot of the really good books that I had early on were absolutely bagged and boarded. But there were a lot of other books that didn't get bagged and boarded. There were some that were double bagged and maybe even triple bagged. I wish that I had spent a little more money buying some really good bags and boards to protect all of my comics, not just the good ones, if you will. And I say that because over time, some of the not so good comics are now worth money, and they would probably be in better shape had I bagged and boarded them. Now, thankfully, my parents always took really good care of my collection. They made sure that if it was in the basement, it wasn't, in the damp part of the basement. So thankfully, a lot of my books have survived from my childhood all the way through. I just wish that I had been in a better position to take care of them. Now, with that said, I was recently contacted by some really awesome guys that sent me some bags and boards. And so I want to make mention of it here. And no, they are not sponsoring this video. They've given me no compensation other than what I'm literally about to show you right now. But when I explain it to you, you'll get it. It's Gorilla Collectible Supplies. Gorilla Collectible Supplies, a guy by the name of Grant sent me over some bags and boards. I think that their products are pretty solid, pretty comparable to BCW, but they're also veterans. U.S. veteran owned business. You guys know that I love the military, so I wanted to make sure that I gave these guys a shout out. A gorilla isn't too far off from a gibbon either, so let me make mention of that. But they sent over some poly bags, acid-free poly bags, and also some bags and boards. And so I've been testing these out a little bit. I do like them, and like I said, they are comparable to BCW. There are some differences. But generally speaking, solid product. I'll put a link in the description. The fourth thing that I would change if I could would be to spend more time having thought about this as a hobby versus just as a way to pass time. And what I mean by that is that throughout the period in which I've been collecting, there have been some really talented artists, some really talented writers that have put out some great work that I may have seen on a shelf at one point and just did not pick up because I had no appreciation for who they were or the significance of what they were actually doing. I wish that I had held on, for example, to some of my Wizard magazines. I did not fully appreciate the passage of time and the importance of Wizard 1, for example. I read it and threw it away, for example. There are so many things that I think that had I taken the time to do some additional research, to think about, to ask myself some questions, should I buy Amazing Spider-Man or Web of Spider-Man or Spectacular Spider-Man? It's almost a no-brainer. There are so many things like that, if you take the time to think about, that will probably come to mind. And as I said before, hindsight is 20/20, but it is also painful as well. The fifth and final thing that I would do differently if I could, at least for the purpose of this video, would be to have bought more original art. I did not appreciate just how cool original art was. And then when I did appreciate it, I did not take the time to buy more of it. Up until the last couple of years, I only really had a single piece of original art in my entire collection, and that was Uncanny X-Men issue number 471. I think it's page 11 or 14 in the collection. That was the only piece of original art that I had. And I wish that I had found this appreciation sooner and actually spent more money buying more original art, because original art is amazing. It's also incredibly valuable, but it is also amazing to be the person that owns that page, and there is only one of those out there, period. That is really cool. And again, it's not something that I appreciated at the time or up until recently. So with that said, I'm going to wrap this video up. As I mentioned, I am interested in learning what you would do differently if you could go back in time and make some other decisions. Sound off in the comment section. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.